I'd also like to offer a special welcome to our distinguished guests, including the African diplomats, the representatives from the White House, and leaders across the government and industry, all of whom are formidable women in their own right. So welcome, Your Excellencies. This is a conversation that could and should happen any and every day of the year, but I want to draw particular attention to the importance of having this discussion now as we're commemorating two important events: the celebration of World Trade Week, which ended on May 21st, and the commemoration of Africa Day, which was yesterday. I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anyone in this room, but it is imperative for women leaders to be at the forefront of the trade and economic policy discussions, as well as business developments, because gender equality in leadership is the best way to achieve inclusivity and equality in the outcomes and implementation. Female leaders like yourselves are key to ensuring women's economic empowerment and gender equality around the world. The Chamber, like many institutions, is inspired by the UN Sustainable Development Goal 5, promoting gender equality. On the African continent, leaders have recognized the economic power of women. Women run small and medium-sized enterprises, making up approximately 60% of the African GDP and creating about 450 million jobs. In recognition of the role of women as economic drivers of growth, during the extraordinary session of the African Union heads of state and government in December 2020, leaders charged the officials of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement Secretariat with developing a protocol on women and youth in the new trade agreement. The focus on economic power of women and the importance of including women and youth in the new trade agreement resonates with me as I read the news about the World Economic Forum in Davos. I came across an article where women leaders at the summit shared their top 5 priorities for the 2022 summit. And while I know the summit is much larger than trade issues, these women leaders were prioritizing rebuilding trust, inclusivity and equity, sustainable economic growth, tackling climate change, and connectivity and access to technology. While our topics today are going to be a little broader in many cases, there is a lot of synergy in what those goals are and the priorities that we will be discussing today. We're going to try to highlight barriers that inhibit women entrepreneurs from engaging in trade between the US and Africa, the importance of promoting policy interventions and outcomes that ensure women's economic participation in trade, what corporate leaders are doing to encourage, promote, and support women's participation in international trade, and the notable women in the public and private sectors who are at the forefront of these efforts. There's much we can learn from one another and much we can do together. We're honored to be joined by our distinguished guests and women leaders from the African Diplomatic Corps and senior officials from the US government, state and local and US chamber leaders, corporate executives, and thought leaders. With that, I'm pleased to be joined today by Ambassador Hilda Suka Mafudze, African Union Ambassador to the United States, to deliver welcome remarks on behalf of the African Diplomatic Corps, our stalwart partners in promoting a strong and vibrant economic and commercial partnership between the nations of Africa and the United States. As the permanent representative of the African Union to the US, Ambassador Hilda's core mandate is to enhance and maintain existing bilateral ties. These ties strengthen democratic institutions, advance trade and investment, knowledge sharing, and promote peace and security and mutual relationships between the US and all 55 AU member countries based on culture and shared values. A career diplomat with experience that spans the African continent, Ambassador Hilda assumed her most recent duties in November 2nd, 2020. Prior to coming to the US, she helped lead diplomacy for more than 2 decades in a variety of government positions in her home country of Zimbabwe. Ambassador Hilda, I welcome you to the podium.
A good morning to you all, ladies. And let me say, all protocols are observed. Um, Thank you, my sister, for the kind introduction. And I'm delighted to join my fellow women, leaders of the African Diplomatic Corps, senior hewers, officials, corporate leaders on this occasion for Women's Policy Breakfast under the theme Centering Women's Leadership in African Trade. First and foremost, I want to thank Mrs. Kendra Gaither, Vice President of US Africa Business Center, US Chamber of Commerce, for inviting me. And my daughter, Mrs. Amanda Shinon, fellow US Africa Business Center, for working with my office to make my participation smooth. Exclusively important, I want to thank Alison, my sister, Vice President, Education and Labor Advocacy and Executive Director, Women Taking the Lead, US Chamber of Commerce, for your touching remarks. At the African Union, my leader's mantra and the agenda of the entire continent is women's inclusion at all levels. Trade is one of the major areas the African Union is focused on to reach women's inclusion. Every day, millions of African women carry out trade activities, and these trade engagements contribute immensely not only to family and community welfare, but to the GDP of each nation. This segment of the population of our continent spans a wide array of sectors, from manufacturing, farming, cross-border trade, and of course contributes to a huge labor force. According to information shared by the World Bank, women in Africa provide the bulk of labor input in Africa. African agriculture, regularly quoted to be at 60 to 80%. My dear friends, therefore, African heads of state governments and the African Union Commission leadership are like never before committed to the goals of Agenda 2063, whose sixth aspiration speaks about the Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women, and caring for women and youth, and caring for children. In her recent statement at the 10th anniversary of the Women of African Foundation, Women Building Bridges, the African Union Deputy Chairperson and my sister, Dr. Monique Tanzabagano, stated, gender parity remains high on the agenda of the African Union and a prerequisite for the success of our mission. She expressed that the Union has achieved parity in the top leadership of the African Union Commission and are cascading this down across other organs of the Union. She went on to remind us that the challenge is still around. These challenges have a disproportionate negative effect on women and girls. She also went further, pointed out that the key takeaway is the role of leadership, and more so of female leadership, in innovating solutions around the challenges, which we shouldn't overemphasize. Therefore, it is my firm belief that coming together this morning to share ideas around trade is critical. An array of challenges in trade industry that existed in Africa before were made worse during these 2 years of the global pandemic. As most of us are aware, no African country was able to provide any kind of stimulus packages like which we experienced, which we saw here in the US, as an example. They were not able to give to the businesses, and consequently, women's businesses suffered immensely, to the point that some will never be regained those businesses that they had already started. At this point, vigorous economic recovery is needed. African women in business need partnerships with those counterparts open to doing business with Africa, and those private financial institutions ready to invest untapped opportunities on the ground, that is, in Africa. That and more innovative ways will help women businesses to recover and or change direction in their business undertakings, especially in the holistic exports process. It is urgent and the action is critically needed. And according to the African Development Bank, more than 26 million people fell into extreme poverty due to the COVID-19 global pandemic. Do you know who has suffered the most in the whole process? It is the women. In a nutshell, we must be on the same page when it comes to finding solutions to make a positive impact on women. That is why this conversation comes at the right time. The African Union, through its continental bodies, is poised to find lasting solutions. For example, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is leading the way. I think most of you have heard about this flagship of the Agenda 2063, that we have given priority as African Union to run with issues of economic development and making a difference into the business sector. Two of its major goals that focus on women in the trade engagement are to promote and attain sustainable and inclusive socio-economic development, gender equality, and structural transformation of the state parties, and to enhance the competitiveness of the economies of state parties within the continent and the global market. Such efforts and more have built confidence among women in both informal and formal trade. Allow me to tell you how Africa is so proud of the AFCFTA and are poised to see the successes that will result in its full operationalization. This continental body offers the member states the opportunity to restructure the supply chain, creation of significant regional chains, and provide the ability to create regional trade networks and the world relationships. This is not only, it doesn't only help boost the economy, but enhances community resilience, in which women are the cornerstone. I wish to end my short remarks by saying that African business community and the African Union Commission, under the leadership of Chairperson Musa Faki Mahamat, is working more vigorously towards trade policies that will make women's businesses successful. Before I just go to the last sentence of my presentation, I want to say in Africa, women, there's no much thanking to the women's going out there and making a difference to the families. Roles of women, of men and women changed at some point in time. Women became the heads of households. And what were they doing more of? Cross-border, hand knitting, hand making things, and crossing the border. And with that, it made a difference into the households. And they were educating the children. They were making sure the children go to school. They were making sure their household, everything is going on well. And besides, I always say they contributed to the foreign currency needs of every nation. I have mentioned it, but I think there's need for a very big thank you for what the women are doing. And I would say this issue that African Continental Free Trade Area is running with, to ensure the borders are made classic and are able to accommodate the women, and also to give capacity building to the women so that they know what's expected when they're going to cross the border, because they've been taken advantage of. I would say African women are multitaskers, and are very strong people. Let me thank you and look forward to a fruitful conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your stirring remarks, and we're glad to have you here for this conversation. We have a special spotlight today on a unique program developed by our next speaker, who has spent the last 15 months creating a platform to encourage women to avail themselves of opportunity to participate in global trade. Camille Richardson is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce for the Middle East and Africa, a tenured senior foreign service officer with the U.S. Commercial Service. She began her career in government with the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce in 1993 and has served in assignments as diverse as Argentina, Brazil, India, and Kenya. It was in Kenya that Commerce launched the Women Empowered Leave Legacies Through Trade and Investment Initiative, known as WELTI, to discuss strategies and techniques to improve women's businesses and break down barriers to increase their participation in trade. Deputy Assistant Secretary, we look forward to hearing more about this initiative and welcome you to the program, to the podium.
I'm a little shorter. So good morning, good morning, good morning. Hello, everybody. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here with you this morning. I think that if there's one thing that came out of this pandemic, it really taught us to value and to find the joy in the moments where we actually get to connect in person. So, thank you so much to the Chamber for this invitation. And I want to acknowledge the Madam Ambassadors of the African Diplomatic Corps who are here with us today. It's so wonderful to see you, my USG colleagues, and of course, all of you who have come in from the private sector and other organizations to invest your valuable time with us here today. So I think for us here from the Commerce Department, this is a wonderful way to celebrate the end of World Trade Month. I'm not sure if you all knew that May is World Trade Month. It's also great timing as it is the day after Africa Day, so I thought I'd just continue celebrating as I got dressed this morning. So I'm just really excited to be here to share with you a little bit of our story in terms of how we came up with the WELTI initiative. We know that it's a mouthful, Women Empowered Leave Legacies Through Trade and Investment, but if you tend to look us up on social media, it's WELLTI. And we found this initiative because it's the mission of the Commerce Department to grow the U.S. economy. And it's the mission of, I think, this administration to do that in partnership with other world economies. The idea is that as we work together to increase trade flows, that we can all benefit from shared and mutual prosperity and have all boats rise. It's certainly a priority for our department. When I brought this idea up to the secretary as I was sitting with her as she was preparing for the CCA summit last year, she really liked the idea and she invited me to grow it, and it has grown. And also, as we've gotten our very first woman undersecretary for international trade in the history of the Commerce Department, Marisa Lago, she recently came on board on, I think it was in March, a little earlier this year, and she's been really, really excited about it as well. But we looked around 2 years ago at the very beginning of this, and we realized, as Ambassador Hilda has mentioned, that women were among those hardest hit by the pandemic. That women were among those who really faced some devastating economic impacts. Why? Well, in part because, as Ambassador Hilda mentioned, we're caregivers, right? We've got children, sometimes we have husbands. I have neither, but I do have a 91-year-old elderly mother that I care for. So in many cases, we're sort of that first responder inside the house, right? Who's offering care and attempting to balance work and life and having to make some hard calls and some hard decisions. And so we at Commerce within ITA, within the International Trade Administration, we recognize that trade and investment are really great ways to recover faster from any type of economic crisis. And believe me, typically when we're overseas, our phones start to ring when the U.S. economy takes a downturn, because people start looking elsewhere for business. So we thought, well, let's sort of think about this. How do we kind of capture this and turn it around to benefit women, not just here in the United States, but also starting on the African continent. So we came up with an idea. We discussed it a little bit, and we came up with an idea that, usually business is the best teacher for business. We at government, okay, we can facilitate, we can provide a platform, we can convene, but really the most valuable lessons come from those who are on the front line and who can inform based on experience. And so we thought that if we were to set up that type of a platform, that we could empower women by giving them access to data, information, contacts, resources, and then of course offer a bit of inspiration. So we decided to start in what is often known as the cradle of civilization in my old stomping grounds of Kenya. And we organized what we called a Wealthy Coffee Chat. We featured Dr. Joyce Gikunda. She is an entrepreneur in Kenya, and she kind of had an Avon lady type of business. And she was able to overcome some financing challenges. She was able to overcome maybe a little bit of resistance within her own family by importing beauty products from the United States. We really wanted to leverage that connection with the United States when we did this. And she was able, through her importing of product from the United States, to create a line of pharmacies called Linton's Beauty World over in Kenya. And so it worked. Essentially, after she told her story, a woman exporter in Miami virtually raised her hand because, of course, we were all on Teams or Zoom or whatever platform it was. And she said, "Hey, can I send you my product?" And Dr. Gikunda said, "Sure." And so Welty was born. We had achieved our objective of sharing a story, inspiring a woman to get into trade, perhaps in a market she hadn't explored. And so it began, it sort of planted that initial seed to what I'd like to highlight as an initiative that has had very rapid and very organic growth, because this was the right time to start it. And we have had a series of coffee chats. Some people say 9, some people say 10. I just say 12, because we've partnered with different organizations to do this. OWIT has been a wonderful partner all along the way. We Connect has joined in as well. And the Chamber, of course, has been a key partner in this effort. In fact, I think 2 of the most successful coffee chats we had featured women CEOs who are running American chambers of commerce across Africa and the Middle East. We featured Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, UAE, Jordan, and Morocco. And we also targeted countries in East Africa and the Horn. And so, AmChams are great partners for us because they're able to highlight the market opportunities, talk about why we're such great partners as a foreign commercial service, and really get our U.S. clients interested in exploring those opportunities together. So as we were kind of progressing along with this rapidly growing and very exciting initiative, I kind of realized, hey, where's this all going to go? What are we going to do with this? And so I said, well, what if we had a summit? That could be kind of cool. And what if we did it, for International Women's Day in 2022, since we started this in 2020? Okay. Oh, and it just so happens that we had a TradeWinds program. TradeWinds is our flagship sort of business forum, trade mission program. It's huge. We hadn't had one since 2018 because of the pandemic. And it just so happened that it was going to be in my region. Oh, well, just look at that star aligning right there. So using the art of persuasion and sort of showing what's in it for you, we were able to convince our colleagues in our U.S. field. In case you weren't aware, we have 106 offices in the United States to support this initiative. And it slotted in very nicely with their newly founded Global Diversity Export Initiative program. And through them, we were able to sort of layer on a Wealthy Summit on top of our TradeWinds program as a value add for both the women, the 50 women that we brought over to the United States, the 250 that were listening in by live stream, as it turns out, around the world, as well as to the 600 or so companies, at our TradeWinds event. So it really was kind of a splashing success. And I like to think that when you're up to the right thing at the right time and for the right reason, things just kind of magically aligned. I will confide in you. We kind of started reaching out to corporate sponsors a little too late. And so then we had to start looking around for money. And The event was in March, and in February, I had no money. In 3 weeks, I had $20,000 more than I needed. So to me, that tells me this is the right thing to do and at the right time, and at a time, I think, when the world has realized how important it is to involve women in economic restructuring and economic regrowth. And I'll get to that in a second as I conclude. But at the summit, we listened to, as we had our coffee chats throughout the year, certain topics kept coming up consistently. Women in the digital economy, capacity building topics, women with access to finance. And so we structured the summit in partnership with our colleagues at the Commercial Law Development Program, who were able to offer technical information on intellectual property rights. Our PTO colleagues also joined in, our Patent and Trademark Office colleagues joined in, information on licensing, information needed to properly structure legal agreements and lower risk. We also had sessions on digital transformation and technology, innovation. We talked about healthcare. We had a pop-up session with Exim Bank and others. So I think that the 50 women who came got a lot out of it, and the 250 who live streamed had a lot of questions. So when I did a live stream at the very end, we had some interesting questions come up that I think will help us to structure the next iteration. But I will say, I think one of the more gratifying moments for me at the summit was when the secretary showed up, and our undersecretary also, echoed her comments that WELTI had become a flagship program for the department under diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. DEIA has become a cornerstone of our strategy as a department. We're pleased. We sent around the playbook for this to other regions, hoping that they would, take any best practices that they wanted to, because we see this as something that can go beyond the Middle East and Africa region where it was born to benefit women around the world. And we know that we can do this, in partnership with the public and private sector. So now here we are, at the verge of birthing what we're calling WELTI 2.0. The name may change, but it's WELTI for now because the hashtag has caught on, and I'll give you a little bit of information on that. But we decided to simplify and structure it around sort of 6 different pillars or wedges in a pie. The first one is digital, obviously. We're leveraging the initial success of the technology, and using digital means to reach and teach our clients. We're looking to establish a resource library. We don't want to recreate the wheel. We want to highlight what's out there, whether it's the public sector or the private sector, and then teach women how to access those tools. And metrics. You got to measure what you're doing, right? So we didn't really start with that, but we did start to notice a few things. WELTI, like whenever we were in a coffee chat, the chat would just light up, and people would start networking via the chat. So that's one thing. I noticed that whenever I put up something about WELTI on LinkedIn, or our partners put up something on WELTI, it immediately started getting between 2,000 and 3,000 impressions. It's a start. We can grow that. Through the WELTI Coffee Chat series, we reached about 800 women, and then I've already talked about the 300 at the summit. I think the heart of the WELTI program is really building this around public and private partnerships. As the Commerce Department, we've always been kind of lean and mean, especially with our foreign service. We've always worked through partnerships. And so we want to diversify that. We want to continue to grow that. There's room for everybody. There's already a lot of folks doing things in this space. Let's collaborate. Supply chain, teaching women about what it is, how it works, how to get involved, how to take advantage, how to engage in global trade with other women and male allies. How to source product. Maybe your source from China is no longer there. So you need to figure out where else to get your product. Networking. I cannot sort of speak enough about the joy that came from connecting in person. There was so much energy and joy. It was palpable. And so what I have done is I've gone back to our posts in Middle East and Africa and gone down to some in Western Hemisphere and said, hey, if you're planning an event, make sure that there's a women's component, whether you're inviting women or whether you're doing something alongside of it to amplify. Make sure that there are plenty of opportunities for women to connect and to network. The WELTI Coffee Chat series, we played with a name. I came up with Inspire Her, and then legal did a search and found out that it's already in use. So I'm going to call it Trade Divas. And this will be where we are going to continue to highlight markets but we're also going to offer programs with capacity building, and we'd also love to highlight women in leadership positions in the public or private sectors that can share their journeys. Earlier, for Women's History Month, I invited several women assistant secretaries, director general for the commercial service to share sort of their experiences and how they left legacies on our organization. And what I didn't realize, because this all came together magically, that they had actually been leading the organization for 30 out of the 40 years that we've existed. And they were each able to share their impact. And it was so inspiring to hear a couple of them say, yeah, I started off as a GS2 and ended up as an assistant secretary. I mean, who wouldn't be inspired by that, right? So we'd like to offer that type of inspiration to women through the WELTI program. And I think we're also working toward another March to March. We'd love to have another WELTI Summit in 2023. We'd love to do it here in the United States, potentially, and to continue to partner and widen that partnership as part of an ecosystem and inspire women along the way to get into the trade game or to up their game in trade. So my call to action to you is this: join us. We actually have a call every Friday. I call it a Queen's Trust, where we talk about how we can expand WELTI. We exchange information and ideas. We find out about what's going on. And then we plan. We put out an editorial calendar, and we've turned it into an action plan. And so because it's not an established advisory body, it's good for me from the lawyer's perspective to have new people joining us and adding their ideas. And I'll leave you with this statistic, and you probably heard it, but it's what gets me out of the bed in the morning and what drives me and what gives me the passion and energy to keep pushing this initiative. I mentioned that we're at an inflection point. We've got rolling crises, but with every crisis, there's an opportunity. We're still in the pandemic. Now we got monkeypox. We got Russia and Ukraine going on. Who knows what's next? But I will say that, and you've probably seen this, Bloomberg had published a statistic that global economic growth could get a $20 trillion boost if women were educated at the same levels as men and held the same number of jobs, obviously at the same pay. So that statistic, as I said, is incredibly motivating. I think that together we could move that needle toward acquiring those potential gains. We could take advantage of this inflection point, and we could really make a true difference as we work together to rebuild our world economy. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Deputy Assistant Secretary. It's great to hear about the innovation and the public and private sector working together. It's particularly exciting to hear how our AmCham network has been able to be a partner in promoting women's increased participation in trade. With that, I am excited to have us start exploring our first panel and diving a little deeper into the themes that both the Ambassador and the Deputy Assistant Secretary have teed up for us. So next up, we have a conversation with leaders from the public sector. I'm pleased to invite up Kendra Gaither, the Vice President of U.S. Africa Business Center, to the stage for perspectives from government leaders on supporting export-led growth through the U.S. Africa Trade Partnership. Kendra.
I'll just say good morning while my colleagues get us set up and all protocols observed. We're really excited to hear from this formidable group of women leaders who will illuminate a number of the themes that you've heard shared in the panel conversations. I want to emphasize the ideas that were brought up here around the concept of the pivot, something that President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf talked about in an essay she wrote for Foresight Africa in Brookings, where she talked about that the pivot is an art form that women leaders have perfected globally, making them critical problem solvers that are more responsive and effective during times of crisis. And in public leadership, effective pivoters engage in critical reflection and decision-making as well to take on simultaneously and seriously the diversity of voices through the problem-solving process. So no pressure, ladies, but we're looking forward to you helping us to focus on that pivot. And to get us started, and I'm going to start with Heather on the end, I'm going to pose a question to all of you. based on what we've been hearing today and the themes we're exploring, how can businesses and government work together to promote and encourage greater women's participation in international trade, given what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and the purpose of us being here today? Are there some effective examples that you would highlight?
Well, thank you so much, Kendra, and thank you to the Chamber for having us. Just the remarks at the top of this session have been so inspirational. And Camille, I'd love in on your Queen's, definitely want to be in the Queen Brain Trust for sure, and really inspired to hear about the progress under AFCFTA as well. Obviously, there's a lot of expertise in this room, and from a USDA perspective, I'm happy to dive in more. But I think, of course, we have to think about the entire ecosystem. Of course, a lot of progress is being made right now under AFCFTA and trade policy, and how to bring women to the table and consider sectors and businesses that hadn't traditionally been part of the discussion. I think it's also important that we leverage all of our tools in the public and private sector to consider also access to financing, education, and digital technologies. I think all of those parts together can be quite impactful, but they really all are critical ingredients.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think you're right. So let's look at that right next, Dr. Agama, and we welcome your perspective.
Thank you so much, Kendra, and thank you to Allison and Emily and the Chamber and WIT for organizing this event. As we've heard, the COVID-19 pandemic has set back women's equality, and it's important that it's basically reinforced the importance for businesses and governments to partner, work together to reverse that. And so this event, pulling us all together to exchange views, to talk about our experiences, and to share information and chart a way forward is important and timely. And I'm looking forward to the next panel of business leaders, women, to talk a little bit about what they're doing in this space. At USTR, we are exploring the benefits of trade for women as workers, as entrepreneurs, and as consumers. We are learning more about the intersection of trade and gender. We recognize and we are actively seeking out and including the voices of women, diverse perspectives, as we develop and shape our trade policy, and to develop trade actions that can address the obstacles that are specific to women and other groups, because we recognize that we need to tailor those policies for better outcomes. We are also looking at data, as was mentioned before. We recognize that data research innovation needs to be broken down by gender in order for us to be effective in terms of using our tools to ensure that the benefits of trade are realized by women and other populations. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharjah Maseda.
Yeah, good morning, all. Thank you, Kendra, for organizing this event. My intervention will be focused on the effort of the Malagasy government to improve women's trade operation. And I would like to highlight an event that the government organized in March. We released the result of the national consultation on women's participation in trade within the launch of the African Free Trade Areas. During this national consultation of 900 women across Madagascar, the government realized that the main challenges faced by women are the need for capacity building in terms of standardization and norm, and on market access in a specific country, whether it is through AGOA or through the AFCFTA. The second main challenge was the access to finance. I think it's everywhere, as Assistant Secretary said before. And the third one is the market access, how to connect buyer with the producer, because products are there, maybe they respect the required standard and everything, but if you don't have the necessary network and the market outlet, it's not effective.
No, thank you for that. And it's great to hear in the various iterations how deeply these issues are being studied the examples that can be put forward. And if I might just, I'm going to ping pong a little bit. I'd like to come back to you, Dr. Laurie-Ann Agama from USTR. Just in that theme of study, we know that based on the information that is out there and sort of the deep dive that the Biden-Harris administration took, we know that there was the first ever national gender strategy to advance the full participation of women and girls in the United States and around the world, which I just think is very notable. And given the consultations that we just heard about in Madagascar, that governments around the world are really taking stock. So if you could share with us maybe, how does this strategy guide USTR's work to promote women's participation in international trade?
Yeah, so just to build on that in many ways, first in October, Ambassador Tai requested the historic, unprecedented independent investigation from the U.S. International Trade Commission for the distributional effects of trade as it affects gender, race, ethnicity, age, ability, orientation, income, geography, and underserved and underrepresented communities. And that study will inform our trade policy going forward. The ITC in March began its public part of the investigation where they held a series of roundtables. They had an academic symposium and they had a public hearing to collect input from the public. And we expect that report to be released in the fall. It's going to be a public report, so that's important. Second, in April, USTR released our equity action plan, which is available on our website at www.ustr.gov/equity. And that plan includes gender and trade-related elements. We will be on an annual basis releasing an updated report that lays out some of our activities. We also, as I mentioned, we're focusing on identifying gaps in the data that we know we need to analyze the impact of our trade policies on women, and also to monitor metrics that we'll need to monitor progress. And again, we're basically amplifying the voices of women. We're encouraging and we're meeting with more diverse groups to inform our trade policy. We've also made gender and trade a priority in our agency's management agenda and also in our strategic plan, which basically sets up the framework for USTR's fiscal goals. And it shows up in our accomplishments reports that we send out to the Congress every year as part of our budget submission. We are also taking a look at our trade programs, and we're trying to understand better whether or not they result in equitable economic growth. And we also want to understand better how they're affecting the wage gap, improving the workplaces, making sure that those improve, and also to empower women in trade. So there's a lot of work going on under that initiative. It's something that's a priority for USTR.
Excellent. And I didn't ask this, but given the focus on the AFCFTA, I presume that there's intentionality too in how USTR is considering support for the AFCFTA as well?
Yeah, I'll say very quickly that in February, USTR actually worked with USAID and the US Department of Commerce's Commercial Law Development Program, CLDP, to launch an initiative to support the AFCFTA's Protocol on Women and Youth. And across the US government, the interagency, MCC with its regional compacts, Prosper Africa and the State Department are integrating gender into their programming. USDA has SPS technical experts embedded, and USAID is providing workshops for digital trade, basically all geared to supporting the AFCFTA implementation. And as the ambassador spoke earlier, the World Bank has put out a report that basically says implementation will be key for the AFCFTA to realize its potentials. And we are excited, especially with the AFCFTA Protocol on Women and Trade, that as we support the implementation, that the women and youth are primarily poised to be able to reap the benefits of that agreement. So yes, we're doing a lot of work in that space as well.
Well, thank you. Count on the Chamber for that. We certainly want to support that. And I think I can speak for this room that you have a ready community willing to support that. Thank you. Chargé Marceda, if I might come to you. We heard from Ambassador Hilda, the very impassioned speech she gave about the role of women in the household and the role they play in improving the conditions and the lives of their communities. We know, and you just shared with us, that Madagascar has been focused on increasing women's participation in government, as well as promoting opportunities to work in trade-related sectors. Are there some helpful lessons from Madagascar's experience that would be best practices that we should keep in mind in our own work?
Currently, we are undertaking some reforms on gender parity in Madagascar. It's mainly about leadership position currently, because we realized with the metrics that 17% of congressmen in Madagascar are women. 37% are holding ministerial position, only 6% in municipal leadership. So the parliament has passed a law to improve women leadership in women holding leadership position in Madagascar. And now it's currently at the Senate for discussion. But as soon as the law will be passed, we will have an observatory of which assess women's participation in leadership position. So we can assess and improve women access to leadership position and monitor where should we increase our effort to have more women participating, bearing in mind that 71.6% of Malagasy people are women.
Well, I was going to say it's such an impressive number, and
51.6%.
Okay.
Okay. I apologize.
I was going to ask.
No,
I know the
51.6.
demographics are bad here in Washington for husband hunting, but my goodness, that would be difficult. 51.6.
51.6. Okay. All right.
It speaks to the importance, though, of the majority of the population should be equally represented in all aspects of government. So thank you for sharing that important and impactful statistic and story with us. And Heather, in your work as Regional Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at USTDA, I'd like to ask you about a McKinsey study. I know we've talked a lot about reports and studies in this conversation, and I know that that's one of the ways to catalyze action. So if I might ask, in the 2019 McKinsey Global Insights report, they published something called The Power of Parity that looked at advancing women's equality in Africa. And it pointed to digital technologies, which we've been hearing about, as an important gateway to economic opportunity. And given what we've all experienced during COVID-19, the fact that that report pre-pandemic pointed to the continent as having the second largest gender gap in mobile ownership in the world, and only 1 in 3 women having access to mobile internet. I'm curious, given the focus on digital technologies and access in TDA's work, can you tell us how the agency is working with partners to support that greater gender parity in projects like this?
Absolutely, Kendra, thank you. Certainly digital connectivity, as you know, is incredibly important to US TDA. But to provide some context, as noted, there's an incredible amount of work happening across the US government in this space, including from agencies such as MCC, USAID, Commerce, DFC, State, and others. But the way that USTDA works, and I think it's important for context, is that we work alongside US industry to structure bankable infrastructure deals that can attract financing, be implemented, and be sustained. And we work across many sectors that are incredibly important for women and girls, sectors such as digital, energy, healthcare, transportation, and agribusiness. So we're at the forefront pre-financing, structuring projects primarily through project preparation activities such as feasibility studies, technical assistance, and pilot projects. We also host events such as reverse trade missions to the United States to connect key stakeholders to US companies, and of course, technical workshops. But as we're at the forefront of structuring these large infrastructure deals, I feel that it is our responsibility as an agency to spend the time and resources to make sure that the design choices are considering gender and social inclusion from the outset. And of course, financing must come thereafter. But if we can help our partners in the public and private sector assess the options to ensure that there's greater equality and equity and social inclusion at the earliest stages, it's much more likely that the choices to design an airport or to think about connectivity and systems, that will be considering women and girls in particular. As noted, digital connectivity is a top priority for USTDA. We have an initiative called Access Africa, which is primarily focused on furthering sustainable, secure connectivity on the continent. And we're doing so in partnership with US industry and, of course, the Chamber. A lot of our work in this space is on connecting the unconnected, especially in peri and rural areas. And we're seeing an incredible amount of work in this space. A lot of the companies we work with are women-owned companies, which is really exciting. But again, I think for us, we have to step back and think we're at the beginning. What are we looking for the future? And when I think of the work we've done and the impact we're having, I think of our work with the City of Cape Town and also the Western Cape government. About nearly a decade ago, we worked with the City of Cape Town to expand connectivity to 2 townships. And this, again, was nearly a decade ago, but we're seeing the impact of that work on a yearly basis because we continue to evaluate it. But just some facts and figures from that, 430,000 people that weren't previously connected are now connected. I think 2.1 million users have greater connectivity. And that spillover effect is not just the connectivity, which is really important, but it's also the access to education and training. And we're continuously seeing stories about women and girls particularly benefiting from that work. And then thereafter, we worked with the City of Cape Town on looking at ICT investments for the city, looking at applications such as transportation, safety and security, and water. And the city is moving forward with a lot of those investments. But again, when you're thinking at the earliest stages, you're thinking, how does this impact everybody? Not just how do we implement technology to have the fastest bus system or having access to water, but what is the impact, especially on women and girls and other groups that have traditionally not been maybe as included. I will note, next time you go to Cape Town, know that our project is led by a woman CIO of the city and also is designed by a CEO of a US company. So next time you're in Cape Town, feel confident that what you're experiencing is women-led. And now we're working with the Western Cape government on expanding broadband throughout the region. And so I think it's really important to think through that. Think about, obviously, we're very focused in working with banks as well. How do we increase access to financing? But it's our responsibility at USTDA to make sure the projects that are being financed have gender equity in mind.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think the themes that you've brought out through all of your comments have really highlighted the importance of being intentional in that design. And I'm really thrilled to know that we can catalyze a conversation that hopefully will bring some sort of design solutions from this community. And in fact, we're going to crowdsource some of that in a brief coffee break. We're going to provide you all 5 minutes to connect with one another as we transition to a panel and hear how the private sector is operating with intentionality in centering women's leadership in trade policy. So we will convene again promptly at 10:15. But we invite you to enjoy coffee and one another. And before we do that, I invite you to join me in thanking our panelists for their insightful contributions to this discussion. Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
Are you ready? I'm going to start calling everybody back while he finishes up. All right, everyone. If you could grab your cups of coffee and head back to your seats. All right. I know it's never enough networking time, but hopefully there were a few business cards exchanged, and I'm excited now to be able to introduce our next segment. It's a panel discussion highlighting the private sector's point of view on centering women's leadership in African trade policy, which is going to be moderated by my colleague Latricia Boone, who is the Vice President of Equality of Opportunity. So, Latricia.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning, everyone. Good morning again. And I want to make sure you all can hear me. Okay, the mic is working. Good morning again, and thank you all. We're going to really jump right in because we want to be respectful of time, and I think we have an end time for our breakfast and networking this morning. But again, I'm Latricia Boone. I am Vice President of the Equality of Opportunity Initiative here at the Chamber. I do want to share a little bit more about what that is, because I'm sure this is new and not as familiar to folks. But the Equality of Opportunity Initiative, which we're focused a lot on domestic issues, but really is around how we support and work with businesses to help close opportunity gaps that currently exist for historically marginalized, underserved communities. And I'm excited today for the conversation we're going to have. We had such a great panel on public sector, but I'm excited to kind of talk to our colleagues around the private sector and really pull out some of those lessons learned and also celebrate their leadership as women, because that's part of what this breakfast is all about, and learn from them. So I'm going to jump right in and allow my fellow panelists to really share a little bit more about themselves. And I think we'll actually go to the first question to be respectful of time. And we heard a lot on that first panel around the importance of public-private partnerships and what that means. And I think you all can bring perspective around what that actually looks like. So what are examples of public-private partnerships that are working and how we can really dig into those a bit more? And so I'm going to start right here to my left. Akego Okoye, please share more about who you are and what brought you here today.
Sure, thank you so much. Hi, everybody, and good morning. My name is Akego Okoye. I work with DLA Piper, which is a law firm. I work in business development. I'm a non-practicing lawyer, and I'm helping to build out the US Africa initiative at DLA Piper. And it's a pleasure to be here. In response to this particular question, we do a lot to work with our clients who are predominantly private sector companies and some governments through an initiative we call New Perimeters. It's a global nonprofit through which we work with our clients all around the world, especially in emerging markets and countries in Africa. And one of the key pillars for us is women advancement. And so recently, one of the projects which I've read about and been very excited, I've only been at DLA Piper 4 months, so I'm learning a lot about what they do, which is really, really interesting for me. But one of the projects that they worked on is increasing women's access, financial inclusion in 3 African countries in East Africa. So working with one of our clients, a nonprofit that operates there, they analyze the different laws that exist across those 3 countries, pulling out all the barriers and helping the nonprofit to create advocacy strategies for how to support women to help increase financial inclusion for them. So this brought lawyers from across the US and Europe, and even in those 3 countries was Malawi, Mali, and I think it was Rwanda. And those are the kinds of things that we do and in Africa and across the world. So that for me was a really good example of how we've worked with our private sector partners to help women in Africa.
Thank you, and I definitely want to come back and dig in on the financing piece. I know that came up a lot on our first panel, and one that is really important to this conversation, so thank you. Hera Abasa, Can you talk a little bit more about, again, what brings you to the conversation, but also the work that you're doing?
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this wonderful event. I'm Hera Abbasi. I work on the International Trade and Market Access team at IBM, International Business Machines. Folks ask me what it stands for. That's what it stands for. So that's your Jeopardy clue of the day. We at IBM have really been giving a lot of thought to the inclusion of women entrepreneurs and kind of what that means on the ground and what that means from a policy perspective, because I think a lot of times we look at the policy piece and maybe sometimes organizations don't connect it to the sort of work on the ground or vice versa. So we've been thinking a lot about that and sort of publishing a lot of work on that and having a lot of events on that issue. One of the sort of challenges with women entrepreneurship, and these issues have been touched on before, but a lot of it's access to broadband, access to data sets, access to digital infrastructure, and also tech literacy can be a piece of that. I don't want to just sort of have a blanket assumption that that's the case, but in some areas sometimes it's tech literacy as well. And I think technology can really do a lot to address these issues, whether there are toolkits that offer digital solutions, access to ICT technology, access to blockchain, access to data set analytics, so entrepreneurs can really kind of harness big data and really figure out what it means for their business, for their customer base, for the way they distribute their goods and services. I briefly want to talk about what IBM has been doing in Africa, because we have such a rich history in Africa. We have a lot of senior female executives in Africa. We have 2 research labs. We had one in 2013 open up in Nairobi, and then a few years later we had another one in Johannesburg, and these are centers of innovation and research and just really kind of tech hubs. I think one great thing we do, one of many, is we work with government and citizens to address issues in a variety of sectors. So we really look to partner with businesses, with citizens. We don't want to just sort of come in and sort of dictate things. It's really about working together, identifying challenges, and identifying appropriate solutions. One other thing I'll highlight, and then I'll pause. Another way that we are committed to collaboration and impact is we have a great sort of skills program. For example, we have IBM Digital Nation Africa that talks a lot about digital literacy, works with individuals on the ground. And that sort of came on the heels of, in 2015, I believe, we committed $60 million to the Africa Skills Initiative, which has reached 20 countries on the continent. And so we're very proud of what we've done, and we're really proud of our partners on the ground. I think that is a key cornerstone. And I'll pause there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Hera. And partnership has really been a theme of both our panels and conversations, and partnership also means that we're working in other spaces, even outside of your corporate space. You have the unique role of not only working at IBM, but also being a co-chair of WIT, which plays an important professional development role for women entrepreneurs. Can you share with us how this growing network of chapters across the continent is supporting African women leaders to participate in global value chains?
Absolutely. I'll be brief because I know the president of our esteemed organization is also going to speak later, so I don't want to take up too much time. But I will say it's really an honor to be a section co-chair for WIT and also to be on the board. And this is an organization that really is about professional women helping other women. It doesn't matter if you're a college student or you're at sort of the peak of your career and have been in the industry for decades upon decades. It is really an accessible organization. It's about meeting women, getting career advice, providing speaking opportunities for the next generation, just anything that can sort of help in that kind of soft sort of networking space. I mean, we want to make sure that, and men are welcome. It's not just women for women. Men are welcome. Men are welcome to be part of the organization.
That's important,
yes,
actually.
absolutely. Yeah. But it's a wonderful organization, and if you aren't part of it, I see Laurie in the audience, and she very kindly was a speaker for one of our key events last year. So definitely encourage all of you to look at WIT and also just formal and informal networking, talking to people, grab lunch, grab coffee, and don't be shy. So.
Thank you. So I'm going to come back to you, Akego, and you touched on something in your opening remarks around financing, which I find interesting because working for the Equality of Opportunity Initiative, we often support minority-owned businesses and the work they're doing and talk a lot about access to capital. But the financing piece, I think, is, we've heard one of the most critical challenges to expanding African women's participation in trade is finance. Can you just talk a little bit about, what are some of the potential stumbling blocks for growth, and what are effective approaches, whether they be policy, whether they be private sector really supporting the work you've seen that can address the resource gaps hindering women on the continent?
Sure, thank you. I like to describe myself as a proud Pan-Africanist. And as a person individually, I am committed to women, African women, seeing African women thrive, seeing African women grow, and as part of expressing that, I started a podcast called African Business Stories, where I interview African women who are building and growing businesses in Africa. And I've had conversations with so many women from over 20 different African countries so far. And at every point, you have a 2-hour conversation, but then you're just going to take out 30 minutes and do a podcast. So you can imagine the types of conversations that I've had with all kinds of women. And the biggest issue for women across the continent is access to finance. There's so many issues. And it's different in different countries. In some countries, it's not about capacity building. They've been trained up, they've been skilled up, they have the skills. In some other countries, it's about that. But the majority of the issue is around access to finance, and in so many different, it shows up in so many different ways for women on the continent. It could be the legislations around how they open a bank account. You need a man to co-sign before you can open an account. You need to bring collateral, but that means you must own land. But then in some countries, women aren't allowed to own land. So in working with governments, whether it's through policy advisory work or working with nonprofits, there's one thing to try to get laws changed. It's another thing to creatively think about how you can help women work around some of these limitations that exist. And then even around the access to finance, there's a lot of money pouring into the continent as relates to tech. Last year, $6 billion alone went into tech in Africa, but little amount of money going into the real economy. We're talking about agribusiness. A lot of these women, we say there are more women entrepreneurs in Africa than anywhere else in the world. And most of them are in this real economy. They're micro and small, medium-sized companies. So when we think about how we put money into Africa and how we make funds available, so many funds popping up. I just did a 3-week tour around the continent, and everyone's talking tech. It's buzzing. It's so exciting, But that's not where a lot of these women are playing. Some of them, obviously, yes, need to be skilled up and moved into that space, but there needs to be thought given to how we create funds to support women who are in the micro and small-sized sector of the real economy, not so much the tech space, and what that looks like. I know that for a lot of foreign investment, they're looking for high rewards, and that's not necessarily where that is. So in terms of how governments are thinking, in terms of even coming back to the AfCFTA, in discussing the AfCFTA and this new protocol, we're all eagerly waiting to see what the protocol looks like. In discussing implementation, it really is a national conversation, not a regional or an Africa-wide conversation, because women aren't a homogeneous group. Women, the experience of women in Nigeria are very far removed from the experience of women in the Gambia. Women, it depends on your education level, your social class, your location. So even in deciding how these protocols for women, whether it's access to finance, whether it's increasing their ability to do regional trade, these things need to be considered. What women in each different group, even in Nigeria as a country, You know, we're 200, I'm Nigerian, by the way. Even the 200 million people in Nigeria, the women don't all look the same. Their issues aren't all the same. So however these protocols are implemented will, on a national level, will really determine how much of the inequality gap we close, not just between men and women, but between women as a whole in each country.
Wow, yeah, that's profound because it's so directly tied to so much that we're doing here at the Chamber. And I want to build on that too, because I think you said some profound things around the experiences of women being different, the storytelling, right, that you're able to really center the voices and perspectives of women. And I'm going to throw this question to both of you, just thinking about the work that you do. You know, there are many programs, as we know, focused on training and empowering women to take part in the economic gains that trade actually produces. But thinking even about policy, you know, what needs to happen in the development of specific policies and practices so that we can make sure that the voices and perspectives and experiences of the very women who are going to be impacted by the implementation are actually a part of the design, so that we actually can experience the equity, the equality that we're aiming to experience. So I'm trying to think about what more can we do, whether we work in government or private sector, nonprofit, whatever that looks like. How can we support that?
Thank you. That's a really good question. We've looked a lot at sort of just on the policy level, what sort of ideas might be helpful. And a lot of the literature talks about the idea of gender mainstreaming. So if you're talking about a trade agreement, it's not just a little chapter about women, it should be a sort of inclusion should kind of permeate every chapter, every discussion. So, you know, it can't just be siloed off. I think that's really important. And, you know, there's some language out there. For example, Canada is often held out as a country that has some good language in various agreements. So I think on the macro policy level, that's really important. I think there's some really good literature being put out there in this area that sort of addresses these issues. But I think, you know, policy-wise, just looking at the big picture, not kind of ensuring that, you know, empowerment and inclusion is not a parochial issue. It really permeates everything, and just making sure that, you know, when trade negotiators come to the table or policymakers come to the table, they're sort of aware of that, and hopefully we can build on that.
Yeah. Anything you'd like to add, Akego?
No, I think she said it very well. The only thing I probably would add is with regards to implementation, and probably like the work that the USTR is doing through government, all the other government agencies, and how you engage the people in Africa. There are a lot of, you know, trade associations and interest groups, you know, in different countries. I think my real, I don't know if it's ask or recommendation, is really how we engage on national levels. You know, I think that's the only way this would succeed with regards to women and policies, is engaging locally. And I mean, we can't capture it all, you know, in the FCFTA, but I think being able to request and ensure that women are, you know, at the table for those micro conversations that produce the reports that then come up to you guys to discuss. I think that would be helpful, just to be able to even get their voices. Sometimes these women don't know that they have issues. It's just what they're used to. You know, you're harassed at the border. It's just what you're used to, and unless someone else can say this is what it should be. But if we don't get those perspectives from the different countries, I don't know that the policies would be effective, you know, on the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely. So yeah, thank you for that. And I'm thinking about the opportunity here that we have several women leaders in this room, and as we kind of close out this conversation, I feel like there's so much more that we can dig into, but again, we want to be respectful of time. As we close out this conversation, we'd love to hear from both of you, and we'll start with you, Akego, around just the call to action. No matter what seat we're sitting in, what is the role that we can play in moving some of this, ensuring that women's voices are centered in trade policy, that we're bringing those voices and perspectives, but also driving the conversations and the actions in the right way?
I think for me, I believe in the power of tribes, and there was a conversation we were having earlier. It hasn't really come up now, but you were asking about the lessons that, we could learn from what happens on the continent as far as, women empowerment and women having the woman's voice at the table and always heard. In Nigeria, I can only speak for Nigeria. I can't speak for I am a Pan-Africanist, but my experience is predominantly in Nigeria. There's a huge focus amongst women on mentorship. Mentorship is it's very intentional. In the corporate settings, even in the government settings, there's a huge focus on you don't rise alone. And so there's so many organizations. I mean, I left Nigeria 7 years ago, but I'm still super plugged in. I'm so plugged in, it's unreal. It's because of the type of networks. They're very intentional about the groups, women coming together, about mentoring, about pulling people up, opening the door, using your position to make room for other women. And so it has created a huge group of very powerful, influential, and very networked women in Nigeria. And as far as the private sector goes, we know that we're a strong, formidable voice, and we have impact. And I think for me, the call to action, I'm still trying to build networks here in the US, but my call to action to us as women is to build those networks and to intentionally use it to uplift and pull other women up. So that's my call to action.
That's a beautiful call to action. I don't know if everyone else agrees, but I think that's an important way, particularly in a room where we are talking about bringing women together to network. But how do we take that beyond this room? And I think you gave us a great call to action. So thank you, Akego. Hera,
I really don't know if I can. I mean, I can't add anything. I think those are wonderful points. I would just say whenever, going back to this idea of making sure that these are not niche issues, whenever you're in the room, kind of keep all your different equities in mind, right? So for example, a lot of individuals here might engage a lot in Geneva at the World Trade Organization. And so one document that was sent to the World Trade Organization was a list of recommendations for, women entrepreneurs in trade that several people in the private sector kind of put together and sent with their names. And I think that's a really good example of showing, okay, there are women who are experts in a lot of things, but they can also kind of advocate on this, so it's not either or. So just, you can be a jack of all trades and make sure that these issues are always front and center, mainstream, and weaved into everything you do.
Yeah, well, thank you both. We so appreciate it. Just want to give a round of applause to our panelists. Truly appreciate it. And I think we are going to move into our closing remarks. Allison will lead us in that, but just also taking some notes from what we just heard. Let's make sure we leave this room with some contacts, some connections that we take beyond this space to do the work. So thank you all.
Thank you. And that was a great way to that last question, those answers, it was a great way to tie it all together. And the idea of networking, I mean, that's what Women Taking the Lead is about. That is what, as I was working with Kendra and Latricia on this event, that is what we were trying to do. And it was also why we wanted to partner with Emily and Wit, because they are also about networking and making sure that as women in trade in particular, that there's an opportunity for us all to work together. So Emily, if I can just have you come up. Emily is the senior counsel at FedEx and president of WIT, and I'll leave you to closing remarks.
Good morning. Thank you. As Allison said, my name is Emily Beelan. I am senior counsel at FedEx here in Washington. So good morning again, my fellow trade divas, which is what I absolutely think we should call ourselves. A special thanks to the Chamber and a special thanks to Kendra and her team for hosting us today. Today I heard so many inspirational things. I heard Ambassador Mafudze point out how women entrepreneurs support themselves, their families, their communities, how linking hands, crossing borders, breaking down barriers. I heard Camille say how this is the time And I was thrilled to hear that DEIA is a cornerstone of commerce's strategy now moving forward. I heard Akedo and Hera talk about the importance of women's presence at the table. Always sit at the table. I don't want to portray this as our burden, but mentorship is our responsibility and it's our privilege to raise up other women and to rise up other women. So thank you for these stories today, for everything, everyone's comments. Thank you again. And I hope everyone enjoys their day. Enjoy your long weekend.
Well, thanks again, everyone. There will be a recording. If you want to revisit this conversation, we'll make sure that you have a copy of it. And we hope to see you again at our next event. Thank you.